My name's Jeb, and it's time to get you started with your organic garden. The first thing you'll need to do is pick a location, and there's several factors that go into the perfect spot. Obviously, the best location is the one that you have access to now. And one factor is more important than the rest, but we'll get into that last. Start with an area close to the house that you will visit regularly to admire the plants. Plant some flowers. Make it something nice that you enjoy looking at. Regular visits to the garden are one of the keys to success. Checking the condition of the soil is important. The easiest way to know is, are there plants growing there and do they look healthy? If so, the soil's pretty good. Plants will endure some wind, but consistent winds will be hard on them. If your area encounters high winds, think about putting your garden next to a wall or building, a patch of bushes. You could build something to shelter the garden from wind, but if you build something, I would make a thick trellis and put something tough on it like blackberries. Swampy soil with a foul odor or dry, powdery soil are not ideal, but that can be improved. Garden plants are tender. If you have blistering hot summers, afternoon shade might help. Now, the most important variable is the one that's hardest to manipulate, and that's sunshine. You see, all garden plants need hot, bright sun to grow. Almost all of them prefer full sun. Even something tender like lettuce. Full sun is best. So pick a sunny spot, because you can improve the soil or even truck it in, but you can't bring in more sunshine. One of the keys to gardening is constantly improving the soil. If the soil is fertile, plants will be present. If the soil is not fertile, you'll need to make it fertile. Either way, you need to do something to get started. So if plants are already there, and it's just a few weeds, it might be as simple as pulling them up. If there's lots of weeds or grass, you'll need to kill them before you can put in your own plants. You could use cardboard or a tarp, then remove the cardboard or tarp and plant there. Tilling is another option, but it has challenges. First of all, it's back-breaking labor. Secondly, any action you take in the garden has some benefits and some setbacks. Like anything, tilling is one of those. Setback is back-breaking labor. It also can stir up weed seeds. It disrupts the natural cycles, earthworms and such. But if the ground hasn't been recently tilled by prior agriculture or livestock, tilling it once may be a good start. If you add enough soil on top, You don't have to till. You can just let nature do the work for you. Drainage is something to consider. If the ground is too wet, the roots will not grow well and the plants will suffer. Some ways to work around this are putting in raised beds or drainage systems. Before you get started is a great time to add some fertility. You see, with organic gardening, in general, things break down slowly over time. And if you add some materials that will break down at the start, later on when the plants are hungry, the nutrients will be there available for them. Something to consider adding now is automated watering. I know it's like hoses and pipes and not very organic, but if you can get automatic watering set up, it will help a lot. And then instead of watering every day, you'll just inspect every day and adjust the watering schedule or perform maintenance. Once it's set up, if it's something like drip irrigation or sprinklers, it can run for a long time without maintenance. You can choose to water by hand, and many folks do. That works great if you are very patient and you don't make mistakes. Because if you overwater the plants even once, you can damage the roots and slow down your garden for the whole year. If they dry out once, they can die, and that's it. So avoid mistakes with watering. Set up something automatic. You can add some garden supports now, but a lot of times you're eager to just get some plants in the ground, and that's fine. If you add a support like, say, wooden stakes, just make sure not to stab the roots when you put them in. Tomato cages are a popular option. They're not my favorite. It's just rusty wire thing in your garden. You can use just sticks to hold plants up, or these handsome wooden tomato cages. Well, there's a lot of ways to get plants started. Some are easier than others. I'm going to go from the easiest to the most challenging. Probably start with the easiest. Buying some starter plants is a great way to start. The plant should generally look healthy. The roots should not be brown and soggy. If there's a couple aphids on it, it's not a big deal. But you probably don't want to import too much pest infestation. For these plants, you generally dig a hole about the same size as the pot and drop it in. Water it well, and it'll have a great start. Some people harden off plants. They'll put it in the sun a little, and then put it in the shade, and then put it in the sun. I would just put them out in the garden. Worry about that next year. Next up on the scale of plant difficulty is dormant plants. This is most common with fruit trees, but strawberries are a notable plant that you can almost only get as a bare root or dormant plant. They cut the runners off and put them in peat moss. They're half dried out, half alive. But these plants tend to start quite well. Now, there is a chance they're dead, and then they don't start well, but you should know that in a few days. If you don't want to buy starts, you can plant your own starter plants. Just get some little cups or pots, some potting mix, and plant some seeds in them. The challenge with these is, unless you have a greenhouse or a very conducive climate, you'll need to start them indoors. And a windowsill almost never has enough light. So remember when I said you can truck in soil, but you can't truck in the sun? Well, there is an exception, and that brings us to our sponsor, Mars Hydro LED grow lights. There's a grow light right here over my seedlings. And if you're going to start seedlings, get yourself some Mars Hydro grow lights. Generally, you want the grow lights to be closer than this. This is a decorative structure. But put some grow lights on them. Don't overwater them. Make sure there's a hole in the bottom of your containers. You'll be fine. Now, why would starts be easier than just planting it in the soil? Now, some plants like carrots don't transplant well. I've heard people say zucchini doesn't transplant well. But what would the point be unless you're doing it for frost? I'll bring these over just for size comparison. Now suppose you plant this plant outdoors and a slug decides to come and make a little snack on it, maybe eat a couple leaves. Well, that's the end of that plant. But plants of this size, if you put them in the garden, if they lose one leaf to a slug, it's not a big deal. And of course, your starts could be bigger than this. Now, one of the most popular ways to start plants is putting seeds in the ground. And for many plants, this is ideal. Generally, the larger the seed is, the easier it is to get started. So, cucumbers, corn, squash, and beans. These grow rapidly, and planting them right in the ground can be ideal. Tiny seeds like, herbs and strawberries, very unlikely to be successful just tossing them into the dirt. Now, the hardest way to start plants is by taking cuttings. Many plants you can just cut a branch off, keep it in water for 1 to several weeks, and it'll grow roots. So here's a cutting here. tomatoes root quite easily off of the stem. This broke off in the recent weather event from a plant outdoors, and I figured I'd turn it into a cutting. So if this survives, this will be another tomato plant. Now, some plants root easier than others. Tomatoes and basil, things with fleshy stems, tend to grow well. Now, with any problem in life or gardening, there's going to be a cost, right? So there's a cost for ignoring the problem, and there's a cost for intervening. Often in gardening, you don't need to intervene. You just deal with it, because the cost for intervening is bigger than the expense of the problem. You'll get better at estimating and managing, knowing which to do over time. But you need to keep that in mind. There's a trade-off. You interfere. At the least, it's your time and effort that's lost, but usually there's some kind of damage incurred, and you have to decide if it's worth it. Garden plants are kind of flimsy, soft, and grow quickly. They often benefit from being held up by something. A lot of times you can just use a stake and some twine and just help hold it up, or plant it next to a bigger plant. Some plants are out of configuration. So tomatoes, their goal is to vine on the ground. That's what they prefer, and that's what they're built for. For production and health, we like tomatoes up in the air, so you need to support them. If you neglect this, the weight of the plant will break the branch off and it will be lost. So one of the solutions is to prune them. Now, tomatoes are a common pruning issue because many of us grow indeterminate plants, and those put out suckers or little mini plants next to each leaf. And if there's too many of these, the plant gets too dense and the fruit gets small, or you get fungus issues. The solution is not to come through and pick off all the suckers. The solution is to understand which of these can ultimately grow fruit, or if your climate's hot, maybe you just need a short branch to help shade the fruit. If you have a patch of fertile soil, plants will grow. And if you didn't plant them, they're probably weeds. Coming up with a solution for weeds in an organic garden is part of the fun, but it's also part of the challenge, because none of the solutions are perfect. You can mulch the soil, but the most popular mulch is sheets of plastic. You may not be into that kind of thing. You could mulch with compost, but plants grow great in compost. You could mulch with wood chips or smaller bits of wood. You might face the nitrogen effect, where it consumes nitrogen to break down the wood chips. Now, probably that won't be a problem if they're scattered on top, but what happens is those start to break down, which is good. But now you have the same problem. You have a nice surface for plant, weed seeds to land on. Tilling less is helpful. Not allowing weeds to produce seeds near your garden is helpful. But some will land. You can pick them out by hand, but that's backbreaking labor. I use a hoe. You have to be careful and realize that you are disturbing the soil, but that tends to work pretty well. The key is to keep on it and manage your garden. Do not ever let grass into your garden. Pests can be frustrating because the more lush your plants are, it's a juicy plant for an aphid or a beetle to chew on. I would avoid spraying anything. I sprayed some insecticidal soap on my seedlings, and the tomatoes did not appreciate it. In the garden, spraying is a huge expense. The cost of the spray, the cost of the time, and the damage to the plants. If you use something like neem oil or an oil spray, it coats the bodies of all insects, including beneficial insects. Fertilizing is often not an issue the first year because you've got relatively fresh soil. But if you are pulling out of the ground, you must put something back in eventually, or it will be exhausted. Using beans and stuff, I'm sure helps a little, but adding some fertilizing material will help. I recommend doing it in fall and letting it rot all winter. One of my favorite chores is harvesting the produce from the garden. Now, when should you harvest? If you can, harvest right before you eat the food. And some plants are more forgiving than others. So, for example, for broccoli, if you harvest too soon, you got less broccoli than you wanted. But it should be tender and delicious. If you harvest too late, the flowers spread out and they'll actually open. Now they're still edible, but you're eating spread out flowers, not broccoli. But if you can, cut it down and put it right on the steamer. Now you could alter the timing of harvest to prevent issues. So if a big rainstorm's coming that's going to split the cherry tomatoes, pick them before the storm. If the birds are after your tomatoes, pick them before they're fully red. Let them ripen on the counter. It's not ideal, but a bird eating half of the tomato is not ideal either. Some plants you can harvest a little bit at a time or the whole thing, like lettuce. I prefer to just pick off the outer leaves from several plants. The plant keeps growing, and I just pick lettuce and eat it when I want. But if I had a big group, or if someone was selling or giving away heads of lettuce, it might be better to chop down the whole plant. Many plants have different storage considerations. You can research that. In general, a cool, dry, dark place is great. Often the fridge is fine. Tomatoes are an exception. Cold temperatures damage the tissues of the fruit. Some plants benefit from being cooled down after being harvested, especially if it's already a hot day. This is called field heat. But what you could say, for example, with lettuce, pick it, put it in a big bowl, and then instead of rinsing off each leaf, just, flood the whole bowl with cold water and kind of swoosh it around. So congratulations, you've harvested the fruits of your labor. What to do now? Well, at the end of the season, start prepping for next year. You started small, maybe you'll expand your garden. Think about expanding new plans now that you've had some success. Maybe it's time to start a worm bin, or get started composting. This video is sponsored by Mars Hydro LED grow lights. Because you can truck in soil, but you can't add the sun. Unless you have a grow light. Now this here's the FCE series, which is kind of unique because it disassembles for discrete transport. So the box this comes in right here looks kind of like a big shoe box, and it actually goes together pretty easily. The driver comes off and has a long cord if you want to get it away from your fixtures. You can daisy chain. Use the link in the video description to buy some Mars Hydro LED grow lights.